I came home early and heard my wife on the phone. I'm divorcing him, Mom. I can't live on his pathetic teacher's salary anymore. She had no idea I was listening. She also had no idea that her broke husband was about to inherit $14 million. Sometimes karma has perfect timing. My name is Jake Lawrence. I'm 42 years old, and I teach American history at Cedar Ridge High School in Austin, Texas. At least, that's what everyone thinks they know about me. Truth is, there's a whole lot more to the story, but I'm getting ahead of myself. It was a Tuesday in March when everything started falling apart. I'd stayed late at school grading essays about the Civil War. You know how it is, trying to explain to teenagers why understanding the past matters for their future. By the time I got home, the sun was setting, painting our suburban street in shades of orange and gold. I pulled into the driveway of our modest two-story house on Maple Street. Nothing fancy, but it was ours. Or so I thought. The mortgage was in both our names, though Ashley always complained it wasn't big enough for her vision. As I walked up to the front door, juggling my teacher's bag and a stack of papers, I could hear Ashley's voice through the kitchen window. She was on the phone, probably with one of her influencer friends, discussing her latest blog post about authentic living, or whatever trend was hot that week. I fumbled with my keys, dropping half the papers on the porch. As I bent down to collect them, her words hit me like a freight train. "Mom, I'm divorcing him," Ashley said, her voice clear and determined. "I can't live on his pathetic teacher's salary anymore. I'm 38 years old, and I deserve better than this mediocre life." I froze, papers scattered around my feet like fallen leaves. Dorothy Hayes, my mother-in-law, must have been on speaker because I could hear her response clearly. "Oh, honey, finally. I've been waiting for you to come to your senses. You've given it your best shot, but you can't make a silk purse out of a sow's ear." Ashley laughed. Not the nervous kind of laugh you make when you're saying something you shouldn't, but genuine amusement. "I know, right? I've been thinking about this for months. Jake's a good guy, I guess, but good doesn't pay for the lifestyle I want. Richard says I have so much potential, and he's right." Richard. The name hit me like a punch to the gut. Richard Blackstone, the restaurant owner who'd been commenting on all her Instagram posts lately. The same guy who'd sent her flowers, just because, last month. I stood there on my own porch, listening to my wife and her mother dissect our marriage like they were planning a garage sale. The papers in my hands suddenly felt heavier than they had any right to. "The timing couldn't be better," Ashley continued. "I've got my blog taking off, and Richard's been so supportive. He understands ambition, unlike some people." Dorothy chimed in again. "You know what they say, sweetheart. It's just as easy to fall in love with a rich man as a poor one." That's when I quietly slipped my key into the lock and entered through the front door, making sure to close it loud enough for Ashley to hear. The phone conversation stopped abruptly. I walked into the house like nothing had happened, setting my teacher's bag on the kitchen counter with the same routine I'd followed for 12 years. Ashley was standing by the window, her phone nowhere in sight, trying to look casual while scrolling through her tablet. "Hey, honey," Ashley said, not looking up from her screen. "How was school today?" "Same as always," I replied, washing my hands at the sink. Tommy Peterson finally understood the concept of cause and effect in history. Small victories, you know. She made that little humming sound she always made when she wasn't really listening. I watched her reflection in the kitchen window, noting how she kept glancing toward the hallway like she was expecting someone to walk through the door. "Ashley," I said, drying my hands on the dish towel, "we need to talk." Her shoulders tensed slightly. "About what?" "About us. About where we're heading." She finally looked up from her tablet, and for a moment, I saw something flicker across her face, guilt, maybe, or fear of being caught. But it was gone so fast I might have imagined it. "Jake, you're being dramatic," Ashley said, standing up and smoothing down her yoga pants. "Everything's fine. I'm just stressed about the blog and some business opportunities that have come up." Business opportunities. Right. I wondered if Richard Blackstone qualified as a business opportunity in her mind. "What kind of opportunities?" I asked, leaning against the counter. She waved her hand dismissively. "Just some collaborations with local businesses. Nothing you'd find interesting." The way she said it stung more than I expected. Like my opinion didn't matter. Like I was too small-minded to understand her grand plans. "Try me," I said. Ashley sighed. That long-suffering sound she perfected over the past few months. "It's just networking, Jake. Building connections. You wouldn't understand the influencer world. There it was again, that subtle dismissal, like I was some country bumpkin who couldn't grasp the complexities of her sophisticated life. I decided to test the waters. Maybe we should talk about our finances. Plan for the future together. Her face went pale for just a second. Our finances are fine, Jake. We don't need to change anything. But I could see it in her eyes. She'd already made changes. Big ones. The kind that involved lawyers and paperwork and dividing up a life we'd built together. I love you, Ashley, I said quietly. Whatever's going on, we can work through it. She looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw something I'd never seen before in her eyes. Pity. I know you do, Jake, Ashley said softly. I know you do. That night, she went to bed early, claiming she had a headache. I stayed up late, sitting in my home office, staring at a framed photo of our wedding day. We looked so happy then, so sure of our future together. I opened my laptop and did something I'd never done before. I looked up divorce lawyers in Austin, just in case. The next morning, Ashley was already gone when I woke up. Her side of the bed was cold, and there was a note on the kitchen counter written in her careful handwriting. Gone to early yoga class. We should talk tonight. I made my coffee and sat at the kitchen table, staring at that note like it might reveal some hidden meaning. We should talk. In 12 years of marriage, those 4 words had never led anywhere good. My phone buzzed with a text from my buddy Mike, who taught math down the hall from my classroom. Poker night Friday. Same crew. I typed back, count me in. Might need the distraction. At school, I went through the motions of teaching, but my mind kept wandering. During lunch, I found myself in the guidance counselor's office, talking to Sarah Mitchell, a woman who become a good friend over the years. Jake, you look like someone ran over your dog, Sarah said, unwrapping her sandwich. What's eating at you? I told her about the phone call I'd overheard, leaving out the Richard Blackstone part. Sarah listened without interrupting, her expression growing more serious with each detail. So what are you going to do? Sarah asked. I'm going to give her exactly what she wants, I said. Sarah raised an eyebrow. That doesn't sound like you. Maybe it's time to be someone different. That evening, Ashley came home around 6, carrying a new shopping bag from some boutique I'd never heard of. She'd clearly spent money we didn't have on clothes for a life she was planning without me. Jake, about that talk, Ashley began, setting her bag down carefully. I know, I said, not looking up from the papers I was grading. You want a divorce. She froze. How did you? Doesn't matter how I know. The question is, what do you want from me? Ashley sat down across from me, and for the first time in months, she looked genuinely nervous. I don't want to hurt you, Jake. I need something different. Something more. More money, you mean? Her cheeks flushed. It's not just about money. It's about potential, about building a real future. So what are your terms? I asked, setting down my red pen. Ashley blinked, clearly not expecting such a direct approach. My terms. For the divorce. What do you want? The house. The car. My retirement account. She stared at me like I'd spoken in a foreign language. You're not going to fight this. I met her eyes directly. Ashley, I'm 42 years old. I'm not going to waste time begging someone to stay who's already got one foot out the door. The next week felt surreal. Ashley moved through the house like she was walking on eggshells, clearly expecting me to explode or beg or do something dramatic. Instead, I was the picture of cooperation. When she mentioned wanting to keep the house, I nodded. When she said she'd need the BMW for her business meetings, I agreed. When her lawyer, some guy named Brad Coleman, who looked like he spent more on hair products than I spent on groceries, sent over the preliminary divorce papers, I signed them without a single alteration. Mr. Lawrence, Brad said during our only phone conversation, I have to say, this is unusual. Most men in your position would fight for something. Mr. Coleman, I replied, I believe in making things easy for everyone involved. What I didn't tell him was that I was quietly moving pieces on a chessboard he couldn't see. The first thing I did was visit the county clerk's office during my lunch break. There, I filed paperwork to legally restore my birth name, Jake Whitmore, the name I'd given up when I married Ashley, taking her last name in what she called a progressive gesture at the time. The clerk, a middle-aged woman named Betty, looked confused. You want to change back to your original name? That's unusual for a married man. I'm getting divorced, I explained. Time to reclaim who I was. What Ashley didn't know was that my grandfather, Samuel Whitmore, had left specific instructions in his will. The family trust could only be accessed by blood relatives bearing the Whitmore name, and only after they were no longer legally bound to anyone outside the bloodline. I'd kept this information to myself for 12 years, honoring my grandfather's wishes about protecting the family legacy from gold diggers and opportunists. Samuel Whitmore had been a sharp man who'd made his fortune in Texas oil during the boom years, and he'd seen too many family fortunes destroyed by greedy spouses. The second thing I did was call my grandfather's old attorney, Daniel Rothschild, a man who'd been handling Whitmore family business for 40 years. "Jake, my boy," Daniel said when I reached him, "I've been wondering when you call. Samuel always said you were the smart one in the family." "It's time, Mr. Rothschild. The marriage is ending, and I'm restoring the name." "Understood. I'll begin the trust activation process immediately." "You know what this means for your cousin Tony, don't you?" I'd almost forgotten about Tony Lawrence, my cousin who'd been trying to claim the inheritance for years, arguing that the name requirement was outdated and unfair. "Tony's been making noise again?" I asked. "More than noise, I'm afraid. He's hired some aggressive attorneys, claiming the will is discriminatory. But with you back in the picture and legally qualified, his case falls apart." Ashley had no idea that her decision to divorce me was about to cost her access to $14 million in oil money, real estate, and investments. But she was about to learn. 2 weeks after filing the name change, I found myself sitting in Daniel Rothschild's oak-paneled office in downtown Austin. The building was old money elegant, leather-bound books, Persian rugs, and oil paintings of stern-looking men who'd probably made their fortunes when Texas was still wild. "Jake," Daniel said, pouring 2 glasses of bourbon despite it being only 3 in the afternoon, "your grandfather would be proud. Samuel always said you had the patience to play the long game." I accepted the glass, feeling the weight of family history in the amber liquid. Ashley has no idea what's coming. And her boyfriend, this Richard fellow? I'd filled Daniel in on what I discovered about Ashley's relationship with Richard Blackstone. The man owned 4 upscale restaurants in Austin, drove a Porsche, and apparently thought my wife was his next acquisition. "Richard's been promising her a lifestyle upgrade," I said, "taking her to charity galas, introducing her to his wealthy friends. Ashley thinks she's trading up." Daniel chuckled, a sound like gravel in a cement mixer. $14 million in oil rights, real estate, and blue-chip investments. "I'd say you're the one trading up, my boy." "What about Tony's legal challenge?" Daniel's expression grew serious. "Your cousin hired Patterson and Associates, expensive lawyers, but not particularly bright ones. They're arguing that the name requirement violates modern inheritance law. Problem is, Samuel's was ironclad. I wrote it myself back in 1987. And the judges. That's where things get interesting." Daniel leaned forward, his voice dropping. "I've heard rumors that Tony's been making contributions to Judge Patricia Williams' campaign fund. She's the one assigned to hear his case. Can she rule in his favor?" "She can try, but with you legally restored to the Whitmore name and unmarried after the divorce, her hands are tied. The trust activates automatically." I finished my bourbon and stood up. "How long until the money transfers?" 48 hours after your divorce decree is signed." "But Jake," Daniel's voice carried a warning, "once this becomes public knowledge, your life changes forever. Are you ready for that?" I thought about Ashley's condescending smiles, her mother's snide comments, her casual dismissal of everything I'd worked for. I thought about Richard Blackstone's smug face and the way he'd started showing up at school events like he belonged there. "I've been ready for 12 years, Mr. Rothschild." Ashley filed the divorce papers on a Friday morning, probably hoping to ruin my weekend. Instead, I took the day off and drove to my favorite fishing spot on Lake Travis. Sometimes a man needs to think by moving water, and I had a lot to consider. My phone buzzed with texts throughout the day. Ashley's messages were all business. "Sign the papers. Brad says this should be finalized within 30 days. Thank you for being mature about this." Mature, right? If she only knew how mature I was being. That evening, Ashley suggested we have dinner together for closure. She picked some trendy place downtown where the portions were tiny and the prices were ridiculous. The kind of restaurant Richard Blackstone probably frequented. "Jake, I want you to know this isn't personal," Ashley said, cutting her overpriced salmon into perfect squares. We just want different things. I looked across the table at my soon-to-be ex-wife. She was wearing a new dress I'd never seen before, jewelry that definitely wasn't in our budget, and that particular smile she used when she was about to deliver bad news gently. I understand completely, I said. You want more than I can give you. Exactly. Ashley's face lit up like I'd finally solved a difficult equation. You're content with your teaching job, and your little house, and your simple life. There's nothing wrong with that, but I need stimulation, growth, excitement. And Richard provides that. Ashley's fork paused halfway to her mouth. What does Richard have to do with anything? Come on, Ashley. I'm not stupid. The flowers, the expensive dinners, the new clothes. You've been auditioning for a different life for months. She set down her fork and looked me directly in the eyes. Richard is a friend who understands my potential. Unlike some people, he doesn't try to keep me small. So you're trading one husband for another. Ashley's cheeks flushed. I'm choosing to be with someone who shares my vision for the future. Someone who can actually afford the life I deserve. I signaled the waiter for the check. When it came, I pulled out my credit card without looking at the total. Jake, you don't have to. I insist, I said. Consider it my divorce gift to you. As we walked to our cars, Ashley actually had the nerve to say, I hope we can still be friends. I don't want you to think badly of me. I looked at this woman I'd been married to for 12 years. This person who'd share my bed and my dreams and my quiet hopes for the future, and I felt nothing but pity. Ashley, I said, I don't think about you at all anymore. The hurt that flashed across her face was almost worth the 12 years of marriage. Almost. A month later, everything changed in the span of a single phone call. I was in my new apartment, a modest place on the east side of Austin that Ashley would have hated, when my phone rang. Brad Coleman's name appeared on the screen, and I could hear the panic in his voice before he even said hello. Mr. Whitmore, Brad stammered, and I could hear papers rustling in the background. We need to talk. Immediately. About what, Brad? About this letter that just arrived by courier. From Rothschild and Associates. Something about a trust activation. I smiled, sitting back in my comfortable chair. What does it say? It says you're the sole beneficiary of the Whitmore Family Trust. $14.2 million in assets. Mr. Whitmore, why didn't you tell us about this during the divorce proceedings? You never asked. We never asked. Brad's voice jumped an octave. This is a $14 million inheritance. You had a legal obligation to disclose major assets. Actually, Brad, I didn't. The trust didn't exist as far as I was concerned until the divorce was finalized. Read the activation clause. I could hear him shuffling through papers, probably trying to understand legal language that was way above his pay grade. This says the trust only becomes accessible to unmarried male descendants bearing the Whitmore name. Brad said slowly. You took your wife's name when you married, and I changed it back 2 years ago. Legally. Quietly. All the paperwork is filed with the county clerk. The silence on the other end of the line was beautiful. Mr. Whitmore, Brad finally said, his voice barely above a whisper, your ex-wife is going to lose her mind when she finds out about this. That's not my problem anymore, Brad. After I hung up, I walked to my kitchen window and looked out at the Austin skyline. Somewhere out there, Ashley was probably having lunch with Richard Blackstone, planning their future together, completely unaware that she'd just walked away from enough money to buy his entire restaurant chain. My phone buzzed with a text from Daniel Rothschild. Trust activation complete. Congratulations, Mr. Whitmore. Your grandfather will be proud. Then another text, this one from an unknown number. This is Ashley. Brad told me about the trust. We need to talk. Please call me. I deleted the message without responding. 5 minutes later, another text. Jake, please. I didn't know. We can work this out. I turn off my phone and pour myself a scotch. The good kind this time. The kind that $14 million could buy without thinking twice. Outside my window, Austin kept humming along, completely unaware that a high school history teacher had just become one of the wealthiest men in the city. The news hit the Austin Business Journal 3 days later. Local educator inherits multi-million-dollar family trust. The article was small, buried on page 4, but it was enough. By noon, I had 12 missed calls from numbers I didn't recognize. By evening, that number had tripled. Reporters, investment advisors, distant relatives I'd never heard of, and one particularly aggressive caller who claimed to represent Tony Lawrence's legal team. The threatening call came at 10 p.m., just as I was settling in to grade papers for my new life as a secret millionaire. Jake Whitmore. The voice was gravelly, professional. Who's asking? Someone who thinks you might want to reconsider your recent inheritance claim. There are people who believe that money belongs elsewhere. I set down my red pen and walked to the window. And what people would those be? The kind who don't like seeing family money stolen by technicalities. Your cousin Tony has a legitimate claim to that trust. Tony can file all the legal papers he wants. The law is clear. Laws can be interpreted differently. Accidents happen to people who don't listen to reason. The line went dead. I stood there for a moment, processing what had just happened. Then I did what any rational person would do. I called Daniel Rothschild. Jake, I've been expecting this call, Daniel said. Tony's getting desperate. His lawyers told him about the trust activation, and he's not taking it well. How desperate are we talking? Desperate enough to hire private investigators to follow you. Desperate enough to approach Judge Patricia Williams about expediting his court challenge. And apparently, desperate enough to make threats. I felt a chill run down my spine. What kind of threats? The kind that requires security measures. Jake, you need to understand something. $14 million brings out the worst in people. Family or not. The next morning, I found my car's tires slashed in the apartment complex parking lot. A note was tucked under the windshield wiper. Next time it won't be your tires. That afternoon, I called a security company and hired a bodyguard named Frank Thompson, a former Marine who looked like he could bench press a truck. I also moved out of my apartment and into a secure high-rise downtown, the kind of place with doormen and cameras and people who ask questions before letting anyone upstairs. Mr. Whitmore, Frank said as we walked through my new penthouse, you're dealing with people who think violence is just another negotiation tactic. Until your cousin's legal challenge is resolved, you're going to be a target. I looked out the floor-to-ceiling windows at Austin spread out below me. Somewhere down there, Ashley was probably just learning that her ex-husband was now living in a penthouse that cost more per month than most people made in a year. And somewhere else down there, my cousin Tony was planning his next move in a game that was getting more dangerous by the day. The courtroom drama unfolded exactly as Daniel Rothschild had predicted. Judge Patricia Williams sat behind her bench, trying to look impartial while her campaign fund had been fattened with Tony's contributions. But money can't change mathematics, and the law was brutally clear. Your Honor, Tony's lead attorney argued with theatrical gestures. The name requirement is discriminatory and outdated. My client has been a Lawrence his entire life and deserves equal consideration for the family inheritance. This will create an arbitrary barrier that violates modern principles of equal treatment. Daniel stood up, his 7-year-old frame still commanding respect. Your Honor, Samuel Whitmore's will was written in 1987 and has been legally binding for 36 years. The plaintiff had ample opportunity to legally restore the family name if he chose to do so. Furthermore, this court has no authority to rewrite a validly executed will simply because the requirements seem inconvenient to the challenger. Judge Williams leaned forward, clearly searching for any legal opening to rule in Tony's favor. Mr. Rothschild, don't you think these requirements are somewhat archaic for our modern society? Your Honor, testators have the fundamental constitutional right to distribute their wealth according to their wishes, provided those wishes don't violate established constitutional law. Name requirements for inheritance have been upheld by the Supreme Court multiple times, most recently in Henderson versus Morrison Estate in 2019. I sat in the gallery, watching Tony's face grow redder as his legal team's arguments crumbled like a house of cards. His attorneys had clearly promised him victory, banking on Judge Williams' willingness to bend a law in exchange for campaign contributions. But even corrupt judges have limits when the law is crystal clear. When the judge finally ruled in my favor, maintaining the trust validity and my rightful inheritance, Tony stood up and pointed directly at me with pure hatred in his eyes. This isn't over, Jake, Tony shouted before bailiffs moved to escort him out. That money should be mine. You don't deserve it. Mr. Lawrence, you will control yourself in my courtroom, Judge Williams said sternly, though I could see her own disappointment at being forced to rule against her benefactor. Outside the courthouse, Daniel clapped me on the shoulder with satisfaction. Congratulations, Jake. The trust is now officially and permanently yours. Tony can appeal, but he has no grounds. Samuel's will is ironclad. That evening, I received an urgent call from Marcus Thompson. Mr. Whitmore, we have a serious situation. Someone broke into your old apartment and ransacked the place. They destroyed everything they could find and left something you need to see immediately. The message was spray painted across my former bathroom mirror in red letters. Dead men don't inherit money. Last warning. That's it, I told Marcus firmly. No more playing defense. It's time to end this permanently. The next morning, I called the FBI. It turns out that threatening heirs over inheritance disputes crosses into federal territory, especially when it involves amounts over $10 million. Agent Sarah Chun took my statement and assigned a full task force to investigate Tony's activities and associates. Within 48 hours, they had recordings of Tony discussing permanent solutions to his inheritance problem with known criminals. The FBI had been monitoring his phone calls since the courthouse outburst. He was arrested on charges of conspiracy to commit murder, intimidation of a federal witness, and solicitation of violence. As they led Tony away in handcuffs on the courthouse steps, he screamed at me one final time, "You stole my birthright. That money belonged to me." "No, Tony," I called back calmly. "I earned it by making better choices and honoring our grandfather's wishes." The irony wasn't lost on me. Ashley had left me because she thought I was small and limited, while my own cousin had threatened to kill me because I was too successful. Sometimes the universe has a twisted sense of humor. 6 months later, I stood in the ballroom of Austin's most exclusive hotel, hosting a charity gala for education funding. The event raised $2 million for school programs across Texas, and I'd personally contributed another $1 million from the Whitmore Foundation I'd established. The Austin American-Statesman photographer captured me shaking hands with the mayor, the governor, and several tech billionaires who now treated me as an equal. The headline the next day read, "Local educator becomes major philanthropist. Former high school teacher donates millions to Texas education." Ashley saw the article, of course. Everyone in Austin saw it. Her friends started sending her screenshots with messages like, "Isn't this your ex-husband?" and "Girl, you messed up bad." She tried calling me 17 times that week, leaving increasingly desperate voicemails. When I finally answered, her voice was small and shaking. "Jake, I made a terrible mistake. The biggest mistake of my life. I didn't know about your family's money. If I had known about the trust, if you had known, you never would have shown me who you really were." I replied calmly. "You did me a favor, Ashley. You revealed your true character when you thought I had nothing to offer. Can we meet? Can we talk about this properly? I know I hurt you, but we can work through this. Ashley, you're with Richard now. Build the life you wanted with him." Her voice broke. "Richard and I, it's not what I thought it would be. He's not as wealthy as he pretended to be. His restaurants are leveraged to the ceiling, and he's been lying about his financial situation. I've been living a fantasy." I almost laughed at the poetic justice. "So you want to come back now that you know I have money?" "I want to come back because I love you. I realize now that I threw away something real for something fake." "No, Ashley, you love what I have now. There's a fundamental difference. If I were still living in our old house, teaching full-time and driving my Honda, you wouldn't be calling me right now." "That's not true." "Yes, it is, and we both know it." I hung up and blocked her number permanently. The truth is, I felt sorry for her in a distant way. She'd thrown away a real partnership, genuine love, and shared dreams for the illusion of wealth, only to discover that real wealth had been sitting across the dinner table from her every night for 12 years. Richard Blackstone's restaurant empire collapsed 6 months later. Apparently, fancy restaurants built on massive debt don't survive economic downturns. Ashley posted a GoFundMe page asking for help with basic living expenses, describing herself as a victim of financial abuse and deception. I didn't contribute, but I heard through mutual friends that she'd moved back in with her mother Dottie, who now blamed Ashley for throwing away the golden goose. These days, I still teach at Cedar Ridge High School 3 days a week. Not because I need the money, but because I love watching kids discover that they're capable of more than they thought possible. The other 2 days, I manage the Whitmore Foundation, which has become one of Texas's largest education charities. I live in a beautiful house on Lake Travis with a view that takes your breath away. I drive a reliable car, wear comfortable clothes, and choose simplicity because it brings me peace, not because it's forced on me by circumstances. Sometimes I think about Ashley and wonder if she learned anything from our divorce. Probably not. People like her don't usually learn from their mistakes. They just find new ways to make the same ones with different people. But that's not my problem anymore. I'm Jake Whitmore, heir to a $14 million legacy, and I sleep well at night knowing that my grandfather would be proud of the man I became and the choices I made. Sometimes the quiet ones really do finish first, and sometimes, just sometimes, justice actually prevails.